thanks for joining us for this episode of the Ideas Podcast. With me for this episode is Joe Suarez. Joe's got his own podcast, YouTube channel. He's a freelance instructional designer. He does a lot of cool stuff. If you haven't already checked out his channel, make sure you do. Joe, thanks so much for making the time, especially on this, the 31st of December. This is an exciting way to spend the last day of the year, I know. It's kind of
Yeah, no problem. No, it's a nice way to close out the year. So happy to be on.
Excellent. Well, in a minute, I will hand over to yourself for a proper introduction, a much better explanation of what it is that you do. But before we do, the only reason people really tune in is to find out what people are drinking as we chat. So what have you got for today?
I just finished a coffee, but to wash that down, I guess, which isn't the best choice, I'm just drinking some water because, like probably half the population in the U.S. right now, after the holidays, came down with a case of COVID. So I'm recovering from that and staying hydrated with some water.
Excellent. And I was very, very glad to hear that you and everyone are okay and safe and not suffering too badly. Compared to some with it, so that's
very fortunate. Yes.
Excellent news. Meanwhile, I'm having a very dull black coffee, so there's nothing that exciting going on. But no, excellent. So what I'll do then, I will pass over to you for a proper introduction. Who are you? What do you do? And why are you here?
Yeah, so you did a pretty good job to start, but I'll just round it out by just, well, you know what? I think 2022 is going to be the year that I finally create a title for myself that makes sense, that isn't like three different things. That should be a New Year's resolution right there. But I guess the best encompassing one is learning experience designer. So I started my career with a background in like web design and multimedia production. Found it kind of hard to find a job in that area, especially just with no relevant past experience prior to that. So that eventually, luckily, brought me into my first job in 2007, which was, my title was graphic designer, but really I was an e-learning developer working a lot with Lectora and working with two instructional designers to basically help them get graphics and flash animations and those kinds of things into courses. And then from there, I slowly got more interested in instructional design, first just to kind of see it as I wanted to understand better the step that came before e-learning development so I could basically be a better developer. But the more I started to look into it, the more interested I got and the more kind of responsibilities that I was starting to get that kind of pushed me in that direction. So that when I joined a healthcare company in 2012, in the interview, I said I was an aspiring instructional designer. And when I was hired for that job, they threw me right in. So I learned a lot really, really quickly, really grew into a full-rounded learning professional during my time at that organization. I had two great managers that really helped me on my really invested in my personal development. It was there until 2019, and then I decided right before a pandemic to leave a healthcare company that makes personal protective equipment and is out distributing vaccines probably as we speak, to try something new. And I got laid off from that job as a result of the pandemic, and that was an interesting moment because at that point, I kind of got a chance to try full-time self-employment while I was looking for another job. So I'm like, all right, I'm still going to look for another job, but I know this process is going to probably take months. So in the meantime, let's just roll with this freelance thing full time. I already had a client. I picked up a couple more to kind of round things out and really liked it, but I wasn't sure if I really wanted to make that transition yet. I was always, it was like this 3 to 5 year goal, like the goalposts were always moving during most of my career. Like I want to go out on my own in like 3 to 5 years, but every time the chance came again, I'm like, yeah, maybe 3 to 5 years further from here, you know. But being laid off really accelerated things. And after some back and forth, trying some different things, even another full-time job, eventually by the end of 2020, I was like, you know what? I'm going out on my own. I had one opportunity come up that could kind of be my anchor for essentially a part-time contract, like reliable hours. So I'm like, all right, that's kind of the thing I need right now to anchor me so I can go out on my own, and just took the leap. And it's been a little over a year now, and I had a really good first year. I don't want to boast about how good the year was because like I could say, oh, I made this much and create like a YouTube video that says my first year as an instructional designer, I made this, or a freelancer. And because I learned a valuable lesson, which a lot of people learn, is don't take on more than you can, but you don't know where that line is until you cross it. And I crossed it, over the summer. So 4 of the months of this year, basically was burning myself out. So made a lot of money as a result, but that's not really something to boast about in hindsight.
It's interesting. I always think that in the freelance and small business world, that how much money did you make should be tempered by that, and how many hours sleep did you average a week?
Yeah, and what did you sacrifice as a result? I do all these other things. I have a family, 2 small kids. It's like something's got to give. So even I always did, but even more so now when I'm thinking about what work to take on, I'm weighing in those things. I'm looking more closely at the calendar for what's coming up, who's got what going on, and not overlooking those things before I say, okay, I'm going to take on this engagement that's probably going to tie up 40 to 50 hours a week on top of everything else.
No, I think that's it, like you say, it's a tricky thing to learn, right? And there is, I've never met someone who's got it right yet straight away. I certainly didn't. You still don't do that, right? It's what I found was that even once you think, oh, I've learnt that lesson now, quite often then a month later you're going, did I not already learn this lesson? What have I done?
Right.
I think it's really interesting when people go freelance, having sort of done it myself, and then I think we've had some conversations about it before. What were the kind of big things when you would go, oh, maybe I'll go freelance, perhaps I will, right, I'm going to do it. What were those key things that made you go from, oh, maybe in the future to now is the time? I know obviously you had a bit of a push with the current situation and companies in the pandemic, but considering it was already a goal, what were the things that you were looking to get from it, I guess, is the big question.
Yeah. So I guess some of the context, that I left out up to this point is that I slowly dipped my toes in over a long period of time. So I actually started freelancing on the side in 2011, just because I went to a conference and I just got up the courage to ask somebody that I knew had their own business. I'm like, hey, if you need any help with graphics or course building or anything, just let me know. And I was kind of shocked when immediately he was like, actually, yeah, I have an immediate need. And that's kind of what started things. For the majority of the time, I wasn't actively looking for anything, but if something came my way, I just usually would take it on as if I had the capacity. So it was always like this thing where I'm like, well, I guess in all my options of things I could do with my career and places to go, going out on my own is an option. And I just over time would revisit it and see, well, what about now? What do things look like? And during my time at that healthcare company I mentioned, I spent most of my time there pursuing a senior role with the understanding that, okay, one of my possible career paths is I could get a senior role. And if I do, chances are that's going to take up a lot more bandwidth, a lot more of my time than I currently have as someone without a senior role. So that would probably end my side freelance engagements at that point. So I was pursuing that, but then at the same time, I'm like, well, if that doesn't work out, I can either continue to do what I'm doing, which is just kind of have like 10% capacity on the side for freelance stuff, or I can always just go all in. And the all in thing was intimidating for many reasons, not least of which is not having that reliable, steady income. To remove that is a very daunting prospect, especially if you're not in the best financial situation, which I didn't really have my ducks in a row lined up for the longest time there. And Health insurance in the U.S. is another huge consideration. If you don't have like a spouse that you can get on their health insurance, that is a very sizable cost that you need to take into consideration. So for me, it was really when I was on that track of I don't want to say playing like 3D chess, like I'm some kind of career genius, but it's like, okay, I'm pursuing multiple tracks at once. One of which is get this senior role. The other one is go out on my own someday, and seeing if I can kind of pursue both of those at the same time, and maybe one or the other will pay off. Well, I got the senior role, and it really wasn't what I wanted, and the company was going in a direction that I fundamentally disagreed with, so that's why I left. And then when I got to that point where I was laid off, it was like, yeah, now's the time to just really try this out, and it just kind of fell into place after that.
You know, it's interesting because I think everyone goes for a very different route into whatever career they get, but especially into the world of freelancing, I find. But the number of people I speak to about it, and they go, oh yeah, well, I was looking for a senior role and either got it or realised it wasn't what they wanted, really. I think it's an interesting consideration, maybe not just for those considering freelance, but in the whole L&D kind of field, is those senior roles are often not what we want them or imagine them to be. I know certainly when I've spoken to people, they've been like, I now just talk about budgets and spreadsheets all day. It's great.
Yeah. And you know, I knew I could see that getting into a leadership position, or even a management supervisory position, moved away from the work more than I wanted, to the point where I would even hear people lament like, oh, you know, I used to do the kind of cool stuff you do, Joe, but now I'm a manager. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to go down that path. And luckily I was working at a big enough organization that there was enough of a career path left for people that didn't want to be people leaders.
That's cool.
Some organizations, especially small organizations, and the first place I started working in my career didn't have that option. We were a small training team of 4 people, and if I didn't want to be the boss, I didn't really have much career growth opportunities.
I think that's the kind of trap that a lot of people can fall into, or not fall into, but end up stuck in as well. Is there any progression in terms of job title, income, that kind of thing? You do lose what you love about your job. Which is certainly for me, it was a big push to go. Maybe not. That's that, and the idea of managing large numbers of people is just no. Small groups are fine.
Right.
So obviously we've gone through kind of the what pushed you to make the jump, as it were. But what the actual process? Because I think this is something that often gets glossed over or made out to be very quick and simple and all this kind of thing, or overly complicated sometimes, I think. The actual process of going, right, I'm going to go full-time freelance. What did that look like for you? What did you have to do and put in place and get ready? And what were your key considerations when actually doing it?
Yeah. So that's another one where, because I was dipping my toes in the water for so long, it was just such a slow build up to what would otherwise have been a lot of decisions, a lot of movement, and a lot of other things. So part of that slow process was immediately out the gate, I opened a business bank account. I'm like, okay, I've read that I need one of these now, and I have one client, so I need a business bank account. And they're like, yeah, and you need to keep $500 in there consistently. I'm like, I can't do that. So I closed the business bank account. So part of coming back to it and being like, all right, we're getting serious with this now, was going back to visiting the business bank account, opening that up. In 2018, I started my own LLC. So that would have been another thing that I probably would have done it around the same time as well. So that's kind of its own adventure. And for those outside the U.S., that just means limited liability company. So it's just a designation for in my case, a sole proprietorship set up as a separate business entity, so to speak, pass through, whatever. I don't know. I'm not an accountant. But so that's all set up. I have my business bank account. I guess budgeting was another thing, forecasting, which is something you have to constantly do. That is project ahead to, okay, I know for sure this income is coming in unless some reason the relationship goes sour with this client. I maybe would get, if this relationship with this existing client continues, maybe this income will be coming in. I guess it's fair to estimate maybe an additional a few $100s for other clients and things that come in. And then you're just forecasting out to the year. I try to be kind of conservative with that, kind of rambling with it. But that whole process of figuring all that out and making sure all those financials were lined up and this was even going to work, that was a big part of it. And trying to think what else, because I already had software licenses for things like Articulate 360. I was already using that. I already had my own personal licenses for those things. I wasn't using work, which I really want to stress. If people want to start going out and doing freelance on the side, they can't be using their work accounts. Even if you think you can get away with it, just don't, because the client might see something somewhere that lists your company name as the software license owner, and that just it's not going to look good for you professionally and things like that. So I know it's expensive. It's like the biggest bullet really you have to bite from a cost perspective if you're just like freelancing as a instructional designer, e-learning developer, but really getting those software licenses is another. It's just, being ready. You're talking to my wife, making sure that she obviously was on board with everything, and understanding the change between going from a more 9-to-5 type working situation to I could be working at any time. I could have big chunks of the day or days where I'm not really doing much of anything. And then I'm going to have the complete opposite where you're not going to see me. I'm going to be up in my office and not really available to help out with things. Making sure she's on board with that and setting those expectations was another one as well.
I think some of those more human aspects are actually, certainly for me, they were some of the things that I struggled with more. Because it's sometimes when you're used to, like, say, working a 9-to-5 job outside and in an office somewhere, suddenly being around the home, certainly I for a long time was very aware of, this looks like I'm just sat here doing nothing. This looks like I don't have a job, that I'm, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Or indeed, like you say, that kind of understanding that, look, there are going to be times where it's just like, no one talk to me for the next 3 days kind of thing. And it's just,
right.
You basically vanish. So it's a tricky balancing act, but I suppose it's also, right at the start we were talking about kind of balancing how much work you take on, and that's part of that as well, isn't it? That's
yeah, totally
cool. So with everything set up and kind of running, finding clients, because I think this is one of the biggest. I think this is both the biggest fear and the stuff where there's some really weird and funky advice out there about just finding clients. I know you see obviously that first client, you just straight up ask them at a conference, which actually I think everyone kind of goes, oh, that's really unusual. But I think actually that you could, if you just walked around a big conference and spoke to people, you'd probably pick up more work than you'd expect. But moving on from that particular one, how have you gone about finding clients, and what have you found to work well or less well?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's something that I kind of surprised myself with this year, because I came into this year thinking that I really had to focus on basically inbound marketing, and I didn't think I had to have like elaborate sales funnels and things like that. But basically I'm like, all right, I really need to revamp my website, update my portfolio, and start having more of a stronger online presence than I already do to draw clients so they can come to me with unique requests for work. And then I can do this thing where I work with them, create proposals. And then I guess that's how my business is going to work. And to my surprise, it's been the exact opposite, where I'm mainly getting clients through referrals and those referrals are just from years and years of just solid networking. And that does include just online interactions and stuff I previously put out there to get my name in front of people and my work in front of people. But also a lot of face-to-face interactions here locally in the Columbus, Ohio area. There's a local ATD chapter, and I've just built relationships there. And I've had work come, and it comes in weird times. Like, I did one small little thing where I helped some organization. They couldn't figure out why their course wasn't working, and it was like one trigger and storyline, and it was done. So it's like this one little project I helped them with. Okay, it's done. I didn't think I'd ever hear from them again. Now I have an ongoing relationship with them, and they're one of my better clients because they came back to me when they needed further help. So it's that kind of thing. Like, I have people around town that I know if they hear of some work that they can't take on themselves, they will then pass it to me. Or, they have a whole network of people that they pass work to, but my name is now one of the names that they refer people to. Another thing is, there's lots of agencies out there that do instructional design and e-learning development work. So what I would recommend to people is just seeing if you can get on what's called their bench of people, so that when there is work that they need help for, that they would then call you. You've already gone through like some type of interview like process with them, and you're now in their system of people that they rely on when they need help.
Yes, and that's good stuff. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's there's so much emphasis put on this website and portfolio thing, and I think it's important, have something and all this kind of thing. But I certainly my experience is very similar to yours. Whereas the good clients, especially, come from networking and relationships, as opposed to out of the blue, I found your website and would like you to take on a contract. Like I can count on one hand when that's happened, and a lot of them were not great.
It's
quite interesting, really.
I actually had one, like the only time that kind of happened to me where someone reached out to me completely out of the blue. It was because they wanted a local developer that knew Storyline well. So they were actually searching for like Columbus, Ohio Storyline developer. And I guess at the time my site had really good search engine optimization, and I actually came up. But what was funny in hindsight is all my interactions with them were through the phone calls and emails. So they wanted somebody local, but I never met them in person. So
it's funny. I think that's not that uncommon though. I get asked a lot, kind of like, for instance, where in the UK are you? And saying you got, that's a long way away from our offices. It's like, well, I wasn't planning on coming in. That's
right.
And you're not visiting my house, so we're probably okay. But I suspect a lot of that may change these days anyway. So here's an interesting question then. So the dream of going freelance. I love seeing the incredible world of LinkedIn, where you're going to go freelance and become a multimillionaire. You're going to work 3 hours a week tops, and you're going to have this amazing life because you've gone freelance. How true is that to you?
So I've seen a lot of claims I think we've probably seen many of the same type of claims on LinkedIn, and it depends how elaborate they get. But I guess the best way to put it, because everyone's journey is going to be different. So I guess the best way to, I don't know, what frustrates me most about those types of conversations is it doesn't take into all the different variables that go into figuring that kind of stuff out. Like how much you're going to make is totally relevant to so many factors. Like, well, first off, where do you live?
Yeah.
Because like I see these conversations on Reddit, like how much should I charge people? And someone would just be like, I charge this. It's like, where do you live? What do you do? What sectors are you, what industry, whatever. Because, somebody in like San Francisco, who's got a contract as like a senior ID with Apple, is going to be making way more than a teacher in West Virginia who's trying to transition to be an instructional designer at a university.
Right, yeah.
And yet I see these conversations online where they're trying to compare notes, and it's like, this doesn't work. Yeah, I kind of forgot your question in my rambling. What?
So yeah, just kind of how true that kind of idyllic utopia of freelancing is. Though it's funny you mentioned before we do that.
Yeah.
You mentioning about kind of pricing and income from a UK perspective. It's always so interesting because there is such a difference about what instructional design or e-learning creation will bring in the States, for instance, versus what it will bring in the UK. Especially in terms of like salary positions are the difference is colossal. Just this week I saw some saying, I got my first role and I was only on $50,000 a year. And I looked at that and thought, my first instructional design job I was on £21,000 a year. And that was pretty good for entry level. It's that kind of where you are question. I'd never really thought about it until this year, and I saw more of it and went, wow, it does make a huge difference. It's, those conversations are a little bit mad, like you say, when you start comparing almost irrelevant notes.
Right. And I'm seeing a lot of pushback on these claims recently, which is really encouraging. Yes. And Kara North she was the first one I saw that really started to put herself out there to be like, hey, this looks weird, and got a lot of flack as a result. But I saw a post recently from Melissa Milloway on LinkedIn where she just listed out her career journey to be like, this is all the routes I took to get to where I am today. And just glancing through it, I'm like, I'm really glad she did that. But also, this is a pretty solid career path. She started out relatively well for an entry-level role. I started out making, if you convert to US dollars, probably about the same as you. Like, it was really underpaid and didn't know any better. Extremely happy because before that I was making barely above the minimum wage at the time. So to go from that to slowly working my way up the corporate ladder to a senior role, I guess the best way to put it is the thing that makes me the most marketable as a freelancer is all my years of experience and all the interactions I had with SMEs and stakeholders and all the figuring out how to modify our processes to make them more efficient with different teams and working with different managers and all that kind of stuff that 13 years of experience will give you. That makes me most marketable. And I'm learning is the thing that, especially in like a contract situation where a company just wants to bring somebody on and they want to be sure that that person has done that kind of thing and can do this thing that they need them for. I find that experience is what makes me more marketable than just having a solid portfolio. The portfolio helps significantly because it's almost like a stamp of approval that, okay, yes, I say I know these things. I've been at these different companies and in these different roles, and here's my portfolio that kind of shows that I know what I'm talking about, or I can do what I'm saying I can do. Yeah,
absolutely. So looping back then, because I know I took us off on a tangent, and unheard of in these shows, I know, unheard of. So yeah, that kind of view of let's kind of narrow it down, I suppose, because you kind of spoke about the financial side of it. But what about working hours? What's your experience been like for that kind of, you'll only have to work when you want, you'll be your own boss if you're a freelancer?
So there's two parts to that. Yes, it's true. You can set your own hours, and you do get to choose how much work you actually end up taking on, but you very well can end up in a situation where you're choosing how you're going to squeeze in almost more hours than you can fit into the day in many cases. So there's both a fluctuation of hours and Yeah, it can vary widely, and like I said earlier, just if you have a spouse or some other family situation that you need to attend to, you need to really make sure that those things are accounted for. But yeah, you can work around it for sure. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about that.
Not quite the ultimate freedom that it's sometimes made out to be.
No, and the other thing that I just remembered, the other thing I was going to say was there's a big difference that I don't think gets enough attention between billable hours and non-billable hours. Mm-hmm. So if I'm like subcontracting and somebody needs me to create a course, so they hand me a storyboard and I work from that storyboard to create a course. We maybe go through a couple rounds of review. It goes to the actual client. They maybe have another round of review. There's a very established process, hopefully, if I'm in that type of relationships. And almost all of my time is going to be billable. Great. I might not make as much, but most of that time was billable. Yeah. If I'm working directly with somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, Joe, we saw you do this stuff with video. We were thinking we need a video as well. Can you help us with that?" I've now got to kind of like engage with that client, figure out what their needs are, decide if I'm going to take on the work or not. Mm-hmm. If so, then we have to write up a contract, and that might go back and forth. We could run into some issues if neither of us set up the proper expectations. That could lead to problems down the road. There could be lots of emails back and forth. There's the opportunity to make a lot more money in that situation, but at the same time, you have a lot more non-billable hours that you're working as a result, which is really hard to compare apples to apples.
Definitely. I think that kind of non-billable element of running a business is often overlooked. And people forget that you're marketing, no matter whether it's just engaging online or whether it's creating a YouTube channel, whether it's just updating your website and blogging. You're going to need to do all this stuff, and you're not going to make any money for it. Even just do business admin. Whether you do monthly books or whether you do your annual tax return or whatever it might be, all that is going to be time you have to spend not making money. It's overlooked too often and maybe just smoothed out a bit too much. But the flip side is that I think there are some real benefits to going freelance. Certainly for me, it's given me the freedom to maybe focus on doing work that I like. Or at least I can say, this is the standard to which we will do this work. Even if, it is really dull. Like I was working last month on international tax services. And I really never want to do that again. But at least I could say, this may be dull as anything, but we're not going to let it be dull, and it's going to be, to this standard throughout. Which was always kind of what pushed me into freelance, was that businesses going, well, it's good enough. They're going, but it's not.
Yeah.
But I think I'd be really interested to hear for you, what's been the kind of biggest upside of going freelance?
I definitely agree with the point you were just making. There is that ability to kind of set your own standard for what good looks like and stick to it, and not be so beholden to other maybe company priorities. That's a huge one. And just having that ability to, if things are going sideways or not the way that you expected, having that freedom to say, okay, I don't think this is working out for maybe either of us. So I'm going to end this relationship. And that was actually one of the things that kind of helped push me over the edge to go out on my own. Like kind of one of the final straws was I was working with a known problem client at a full-time job situation. And I realized this is like a real problem client. And if this were a situation where this was one of my clients, I would have let them go at this point. But I'm seeing that if I stick around at this job, I'm just going to have to continue working with this client. So it's having that freedom to say, this isn't working, and I'm going to work with clients that are maybe either better to work with, or, you know, whatever the situation is, having that freedom.
Definitely. No, I like that. That's a nice benefit to have, without a shadow of a doubt. So I think we've spoken quite a lot about kind of freelancing specifically, but kind of broadening things out to kind of the world of learning, which sounds very grand, though it often doesn't look quite so grand once you start peering under rocks. I'd be really interested to hear, as it is the last day of the year, what are kind of the things that you've really seen in the learning space come to light, or really start to gain pace and take up in 2021?
That's a great question. And it kind of hits at some anxiety that I have about being out on my own now, where it's like, I have to be constantly aware of those things, have an awareness of those things, right? I need to constantly be keeping an eye out for what is changing, because I'm no longer in a work situation where it's going to be more front and center. It's hard to describe. Hopefully it's coming across right. But being on your own, you run the risk of not paying attention to certain things and having them run by you. Yeah. But having said that, I think the thing that has shocked me the most this year is what is an instructional designer seems to be changing. And that's always a perennial question, but it just seems like that's just kind of gone off the rails at this point. Yeah. And that's even taking into account that a lot of people for many years thought instructional design was, I make courses in authoring tools. And that drove me crazy, even as an accidental instructional designer who came from creating courses. That kind of drives me crazy, because there's so much more to it. And yeah, that's just the biggest thing I've seen this year is what is ID, where is it heading, and what does it take to be one? The answers to those questions are just coming out of left field.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that's, and some of it I think is genuine. I think the needs placed upon instructional designers are shifting. As businesses have shifted quite radically, you'd expect to see a shift in that role, because it's going to be very responsive to the business. But I also think some of it is being driven by companies wanting to sell technology. There's this huge, or I don't know, maybe everything's perceived, right? It depends on what you happen to see and come across. But I'm constantly having conversations where people are telling me about how, the biggest new skill for instructional designers is going to be understanding, the cloud and all this sort of thing. I'm thinking, really? Because that doesn't sound even vaguely related to what I do. Right. Not even slightly. Or, the sort of VR and AR worlds and that kind of thing, and I kind of get that technology is really cool. Like I love, I've always said I'm a bit of a tech nerd. I like that sort of stuff from a wow, that's technically wonderful space. But I look at it from a learning space still and think, really, we're thinking that's a core skill now. I would question that. I would much rather see needs analysis and SME relationship building be on that list, as opposed to developing VR environments.
Yes,
but
yes.
Who knows? Maybe I'm just old and out of touch now. That's what it is.
No, I totally agree with you, and I like to keep pace with where that technology is going, especially with the augmented reality space, because I think that has more potential for learning than VR. Definitely. I don't know why people are just kind of obsessed with putting people in a state where they've been deprived of their primary senses that they use to navigate the world in everyday life. That's completely nauseating to most people for obvious reasons.
The real world
and
is
why
just
we want to say
that we want to completely replace it. That's
and we're going to replace it with meetings in virtual reality. I don't think so.
Totally see that.
But yeah, augmented reality. If I'm somebody on a manufacturing floor and I need to learn how to repair a piece of machinery, and I can pull something up in see some type of hologram-like thing right in front of my face and see it happening. That has such vast applications.
Yeah.
So I'm always keeping an eye on seeing if there's any developments there, but currently it's just, it has the sheen of more novelty than application at this point. But I have this sense that eventually it's just all going to switch. Like, and it'll feel like it's overnight. Like suddenly there is going to be something that makes it more viable, and suddenly it's just going to be there in a way it's going to feel like it was always there, just like cell phones and all the other technology that we have.
Definitely.
And I'm not going to make a prediction about how close we are to that, because I will be way off if I try.
Like me, in 2019, I wrote an article saying SCORM is dead, long live XAPI. And in 2022, almost, I'm still hitting there going, publish to SCORM. I learned the hard way about that one. But yeah, so speaking of predictions then, we spoke about what we saw in 2021. Based on everything you have seen and what you think, what do you think we're going to see in 2022?
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot. Yeah.
Other than more COVID vaccines. And that's a thing. I'm waiting for someone to cash in and kind of start selling shirts with little tabs that you can just pull up. Then you can sort of drive by, get jabbed, put your clothing back down and go. It'd be great.
I think this year, the last holdouts of companies that have just been resisting the push to more remote, more flexible working are either going to break down or they're going to start to lose revenue and maybe even go out of business. Start to lose employees. There's such a crazy revolutionary shift in work happening right now, and that's not going to end because 2021 ended. It didn't end because 2020 ended. It's an ongoing thing. And that changes how we work. Even as a freelancer, that changes how we work. The biggest thing that I've noticed starting my full-time business this year in 2021 has been how easy it is to be in a work from home situation and work with clients and teams, and they're all in the same situation as well. Yeah. Because if I had tried to do that like 5 years ago, and I'd probably be on a lot more phone calls, I'd probably have a lot more email chains. It's just everyone's more comfortable with it now. And I think kind of the last holdouts in that regard, to not really getting the online work from home thing, not really understanding the flexibility of hours and things like that. I think we're going to see a lot of those holdouts finally give in.
I certainly hope that's the case. And that's it would be nice to see. And I've still got a couple of clients who are we're in the office, and you can tell when you go onto a call they're trying to use some virtual office meeting thing where there's 12 of them on the same camera and the same microphone. They're going, "This is great, what I dreamed of."
Yeah. Oh, you're giving me flashbacks too.
Nice, right?
Being at work and calling into to conference rooms. I can hear the person right in front of the mic, but I can't hear the person way at the end of the table. And oh my gosh,
this is it! All those hours of enter your 12-digit code followed by that pound key, and
yes.
But so thinking specifically about, cause one thing I've been looking at a lot at the moment is this. There seems to have been an explosion of like instructional design or certainly courseware related software. Sort of I would say at the start of 2020, if you'd asked someone to name authoring tools, you might have got 3 or 4 from most people, maybe 5 or 6. Now, I mean, every month there seems to be a new authoring tool launching to the market. And again, I've only had a look at some of them, but there seems to be some quite interesting stuff going on. And I just wondered, is there anything you've seen that you kind of think that's actually quite an interesting addition? Because I suspect some are, and I also suspect some are just a rehash of what we've always had in a new mask kind of thing.
Yeah, and I always am on the lookout for the next greatest tool. What's going to be the thing that's finally going to push us off of Articulate Storyline? And not to get too hard on it as a tool, but I think the best way to sum up my problems with it is that it came out in 2012 and it was a 2012 solution to a 2012 problem that just kind of has had a little bit of incremental improvements since, to where now we're almost 10 years later and what does it solve anymore? Why are we still over prescribing slide-based e-learning course solutions? But, at the same time, these newer tools, they're still, to be profitable, are appealing to a market. And that market is people familiar with what it currently exists, which is Storyline, Captivate, and now Rise and other more straightforward, low to no code scrolling courses or learning solutions of some kind. So I like the trend of we're actually moving into true responsive design courses and things that scroll nicely and work on mobile devices and desktop is, that they work seamlessly that way. I think the tools that aren't targeted towards the learning space do that best already, like Webflow, and it's hard to even keep up with all the ones that come out, but they're just so slick and clean at what they do. And then you have the ability to go under the hood and adjust the code if necessary with many of them, including Webflow. And you just don't see that in the tools that are specifically marketed for learning, which bugs me, but then at the same time, it makes sense because the average user is probably going to be an instructional designer or someone in that role that is going to be overwhelmed by all the code anyway. So why let them bother? But then at the same time, tools like Articulate Rise are so limited that it's like, this isn't even, in my opinion, working as one of these tools. It could be so much more robust if it just had the ability to be.
Like, by all means, allow people to just use that simple layer that Rise currently has, but what would be wrong with an additional little kind of advanced options tab, where you could just change those little things around, have overlapping rows. Oh my god.
Right. And it's even more frustrating once and I'm not a programmer or a SaaS creator by any means, but once you have a basic understanding of what's happening behind the scenes when you adjust settings in Rise, that when you say I want to change this from big to small, or the text size or whatever, that it's all just manipulating some cascading style sheets in the background. So if that's the case, why can't I control where this text header here is all caps and this one over here isn't? Why are those? If the tool is going to make design decisions for me, I want it to at least be consistent with itself, which Rise isn't. It would be great if I had some different templated options. So if I don't like this look and feel, I can switch to another one. And it would be great if I had a little bit more fine control over the look and feel of things, if for no other reason than to conform to my company's branding or my client's company's branding. And Rise does none of those things. So I'm always eager to see another tool come out that can do what Rise does and do it much better.
That's why I've kind of been I've been shouting a lot this past year about Adapt being kind of the way we need to move. It helps that it's open source, so people can try it without spending anything, which again is something our industry kind of lacks, to a surprising amount, is open source stuff. Certainly the broader software world is full of it. Whether it's the graphic design space or the animation space, there's been a big push for open source there for years, but not in the ID world, which is I suppose we're more niche, I should say.
That's something that's something that's shocked me for years, is just how quickly, and perhaps naively, not to be rude about it, but I don't understand. Companies just seem eager to jump into lockdown proprietary solutions without understanding the longer term implications of you're going to need perpetual licenses for that product. You're not going to be able to adjust things down the road. And, if for some reason that relationship, there's just so many reasons like things can go wrong.
Well, the number of times I got asked, oh, can we convert this to storyline? It's an old Captivate file. It's like, well, when you say convert, we can remake it. Right. That's, or whether it's rise into evolve or whatever it might be. I think, people just don't foresee that. And I think,
but alternatively, like a tool like Webflow,
yes,
it's a proprietary tool. Yes. But what do you get if you, I think now pay for a specific tier?
Yeah.
What do you get? You get the ability to export the entire project as just plain web standards driven code.
Yep.
So that if you needed to, you could take that export and open it up in something else and be able to edit everything and not need a perpetual license for Webflow.
I think
that understanding and that benefit is lost with most training departments and organizations.
I said that the to me, kind of the dream fix right now is some kind of extension to install on Webflow where you could literally go export to SCORM. And it would SCORM a Webflow set of... Because like say where it is just HTML, JavaScript, CSS, you would think that... You would think it wouldn't be that much work. It would be a huge amount of work, but not for the kind of people that do that sort of stuff anyway. Like SCORM and even XAPI is not a complex system compared to these other things these people work in. I think if I'd love it to be an open source project, but even if someone created it and build for it, like it would create to my mind, the best authoring tool on the market overnight, with complete freedom, effectively. But maybe one day someone will hear me say this and be like, we're going to do that.
Yeah,
cool.
We can only hope.
Absolutely. So we're rapidly coming up on the hour. So thank you so much for taking the time to spend some time and have a chat. But there's two things I did want to ask you about before we finish up. First of all, your YouTube channel. I'm always really interested for anyone that does YouTubes and your podcast as well. Can you tell us a little bit about those and why you started them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's start with the podcast because that came first. And it's funny in hindsight because I host it with Kara North. It's called the Instructional Redesign Podcast for anyone that's not familiar. And I launched it in 2017. I say I because, Kara is my co-host, but I do all the producing and everything. And it was originally something I wanted to do. And then I just reached out to her and asked her if she wanted to do it. And she was really excited to help out and join me in it. But the reason I did it in 2017 is because there weren't enough learning and development podcasts, which is like to say that now sounds insane because there's so many, and I try and listen, at least check out as many as I can. And most of them I think are decent or like have something to contribute. I haven't really run across a lot that I would say aren't valuable. So it's weird to think that in 2017, there was kind of this landscape where I think this world needs a voice of an L&D podcast. But that's what it was. I originally thought it was going to be more of like a more audio heavy. If you're familiar with shows like This American Life or Radio Lab, like those shows that kind of really play with the medium of audio and tell stories that way. I thought it was going to be more like that. And then I realized that's a lot of work. Teams spend like months creating an episode of Radio Lab, and they're specialized journalists. There's audio technicians. There's all kinds of things, and their podcast is probably like 30 tracks of audio, whereas I've got a couple tracks for me and Kara, and then maybe an audio track, and that's about it for intros and outros. So expectations were quickly tempered, and then it just was me and Kara having conversations. We thought maybe it would be, I think originally we were thinking bi-weekly, and then it turned to monthly, and then that turned to monthly-ish. We released one episode in 2021, but I'm happy to report that we have several that we're going to release in early 2022 with, I think we have one with Tom McDowell, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, God, you don't want him on your podcast.
So stay tuned for that one.
Yeah.
So that's the podcast. And with the YouTube channel, it was more so I wanted to take that in kind of a different route. I was thinking originally more so with tutorials, combination of tutorials, and then maybe some storytelling through video as well. I've done a little bit of both, and it's fun to play around with the storytelling. I kind of have this series where it's like career stories where I talk about lessons I've learned, sometimes the hard way, and just kind of have fun with it. And then I do a lot of tutorials as well, and then just kind of ramble about different things at times as well. Like I made one where my most recent video was looking at the supposed new version of Captivate that they announced, and just looking at the announcements video and getting a little excited in places and maybe a little discouraged in other places, and just giving my opinion about things. And yeah, I just have a lot of fun with it. And it's one of those things where I started out when I had some intentions with it, and then I realized those weren't really realistic. And now I just create videos without as much as intention as I'd like, but at the same time, I'm comfortable with that because I want to see what resonates with people and what people would like to hear. So it's a fun little experiment. I wish I could get to making more videos than I do, but I'm happy for the ones that I get out.
Absolutely. And that's eLearning Out Loud, right?
Yeah. That's the YouTube channel name, is eLearning Out Loud.
Cool. And we will obviously have links to both the podcast and the YouTube channel in this episode. Go and subscribe, because they are... the video you did where it was about going through the different jobs, boxing up laptops. That was such a lovely use of video. Just simple, short video clips. And I ended up showing it to someone else that I was trying to explain this concept to, about how you can use these really short bits of video to tell a story without actually having to put that much work in.
Yeah.
Comparatively speaking to when you talk about storytelling video, people often start going, this will take months of camera work and it'll be all this and that. You think, no, you don't actually need these huge long bits of video. In just a few short clips, you can create this story.
Right.
And it was such a good example of that, I thought.
Yeah, that was so fun, and I knew it was a way that I could highlight my video skills in a different way, a fun way, and just try to emulate some of the YouTubers that I admire that do such a great job of telling great stories and not being the typical YouTuber that's just like, hey, look at me, and let me ramble on about myself, and just tell great stories about things that you may seem trivial in other contexts, but in the way that they present their videos is really engaging. And one of my favorite creators in that regards is a guy named Johnny Harris. He used to be a journalist at Vox, and now he kind of does his own things, creating just analytical videos about like different countries and country borders and all kinds of things. So I'm really glad that video that I made about my 2020 experience turned out well.
Yeah, no, I thought it was really cool. Awesome. The only other thing I would say really was I always try and give people a little bit of time at the end of an episode for kind of, anything they want to talk about at the moment, anything they're thinking about, what's coming up next, what they're dealing with, or what they're planning to do at the moment. So here's a little bit of time for you. Anything you want to talk about?
Oh man, we covered all the greatest hits. I got to talk about my love-hate relationship with Storyline already, and yeah, I say this in the episode where I interview, but I just really like the stuff that you're doing as well. I like your take on things, and you just have like an unfiltered perspective on things, which I find very enjoyable and relatable. And a lot of times when I hear you talk in your videos, I'm like, yes, that's what I'm always thinking. Why aren't more people saying it like me and Tom are? So it's refreshing to hear you say a lot of the things that you do. I also like that you're doing this conference, the IDTX conference again. So I don't know why I'm turning in this to a thing where I plug all your work, but I really do admire the things you do. So yeah, just thanks for having me on, and keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you very much. No, that's the first time anyone's ever done that, when I give them free time to talk about whatever they want. But thank you, that's very nice.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, we covered my podcast and my YouTube channel, and I'm not really at a point where I'm plugging my business, because as just a solo, freelancer who's not looking to create a business where I have employees or really even have contractors at this point, I already have more work than I can take on, and I'm having to turn people down. So not really plugging my business at this point, but if that changes down the road, josephsuarez.com will point to whatever my big venture is.
And if nothing else, you can go and check out Joe's work on there. That's always good to look at. Fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for taking the time out to join me for this chat. And thank you, everyone in the audience, for tuning in. Make sure before you leave, you first of all, control and click the links, or no, shift and click the links into a new tab to go and subscribe to Joe's channel, and then make sure you subscribe and like this video, and we will see you in the next episode.